As things stand, 100 rand can get your household just under 40 units of electricity. But this may soon change. Eskom has applied for a 20.5% hike in the price of electricity. Now, this would mean that 100 rand would get you only around 30 units. It ultimately means that people will pay even more for electricity. Energy expert Lungile Mashele joins me now to discuss this further. Lungile, many thanks for your time this afternoon. And I mean, this is a very unsustainable way for Eskom to generate income. We do know that they do suffer from lower sales, but this cannot be the only revenue stream squeezing the households of the country.
Thank you so much for having me. And unfortunately, this is where Eskom finds itself after years of mismanagement, of being inefficient, but also of not getting the tariff increases that they have requested in the past. And it's almost like we've kicked the can down the road, and now we're at the end of the road, and you've got issues around the regulatory clearing account, which need to be resolved. You also have issues around the 69 billion bailout, which only 10 billion of that has been disbursed, and Eskom is actually due the balance of that. And we find ourselves in the unfortunate position that now Eskom is requesting this 20.5%. It's unsustainable, but unfortunately, till Eskom is back on its feet, you and I are going to have to pay this amount, or else we will be in the dark.
Yeah, the problem with that, though, is that we might never see an Eskom that gets back on its feet. Ultimately, some hard decisions have to be made about alternative sources of energy, as well as the pace in which we introduce those onto the grid.
Absolutely. So you will recall that there is the Integrated Resource Plan 2019, and in it, it was very clear what our forward-looking views are, and we're looking at, I think, 2022. The DMRE has said that there will be tenders for more renewables, for more gas, nuclear, as well as coal. However, we can't run away from the fact that if we procure more, obviously we are going to have to pay more as well. Eskom claims that its costs are not cost reflective, that is subject to a lot of debate. However, many of us are municipal customers, and municipalities are over recovering in most instances. So we're actually caught between a rock and a hard place as consumers, needing the electricity and inefficient Eskom, but also rising costs as well as the inefficient use of diesel as well as coal as well.
So what are we likely to be seeing after this consultative process on the price hike for Eskom? We do know that traditionally Nersa has never granted the actual amount that Eskom has asked for, but I wonder what's going to be happening this time around, particularly because of a court battle that's been had between the two bodies over the last few months. The direction you think Nersa will take just after this consultative process?
So it's a bit of a tricky one to gauge, because Eskom has in the past asked usually for 21-23% increases. Nersa has come down and shut them down, giving them only like 15, 14, 13% increases. However, this time around, I think there might be a change in tact in how Nersa is going to receive this, primarily because there's still the issue of the 69 billion, less the 10 billion, which needs to be resolved, which was government bailout. And there's also the issue of the regulatory clearing accounts, which need to be resolved at some point also. So we know that there is, in addition to what Eskom is asking for, there is an RCA clearance of about 14 billion that is coming to them as well, which has where the quantum and the timing of the liquidation by Nersa have been approved. So I'm leaning more towards the 20% mark, especially because Eskom for this year, well, rather for the 2023 year, is including a carbon tax with the environmental levy, because the carbon tax does come into play in 2023. So we should rather expect tariff increases to be on the 20% mark, I'd say.
And it's going to be tough for them because that carbon tax that will have to be forked out by Eskom is going to be an even bigger expense for them, given the fact that they are not able to adjust to more sustainable ways of operation in the time that has been recommended by different bodies. Eskom talks about getting in line with the rules of COP26, for example, by 2050, which is way too far away.
Absolutely, and you know, and it's a culmination of a different number of activities. We've got the new build, Meduphi, which came in late. We also have not decommissioned as what was proposed in the 2010 Integrated Resource Plan. And we've also been very slow in adding on new generation, green, renewable generation capacity on board as well. So the carbon tax is coming at a time where we're also looking at just energy transition. And yes, over time, it will have a lesser burden, but it's coming at a really unfortunate time. And unfortunately, it was policymakers, it was Eskom, it was a number of influential people who dragged their feet, and we're here now, and consumers in their tariff are going to have this carbon tax added on as well.
Absolutely. So again, I bring up the issue of renewable energy, and if you could just give us a broad sense or an understanding, should we get alternative sources of energy on the grid sooner rather than later, will that drastically have an impact on the price that we currently pay for electricity, or not so much?
So we should recall that over the last couple of years, we have been adding on like renewable energy up. I think now we're like sitting at about 6,500 megawatts of additional capacity. But the first two rounds were extremely expensive when you're comparing them to what we're getting at now. So if you look at the Eskom average tariff plus the IPP average tariff, we're not going to get to where we'd like to get. Yes, if Eskom looks at a decommissioning process of the older plants, looks at adding on new plants that are cheaper, and looks at buying from competitive IPPs, and also more importantly, the embedded generation program with the private sector where they can add up to 100 megawatts. Looking at all of that cumulatively, it will have an impact like on price. We are hoping positively though, but for the long-term outlook, or rather short to medium-term outlook, it will not have that much of a great impact, because we have invested in assets that we have to pay off. We have debt, and when I say we, I mean Eskom, and because that is guaranteed debt, that is state debt, that is South African debt, it means that we still need to pay that off. So no, tariffs are not going to come down anytime soon.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your time this afternoon. Energy expert Lungile Mashele joining me there just to speak about that consultation process around the tariff hike that Eskom is asking for. Those conversations or public comments are coming to an end, and a decision will be made by the regulatory body and Nersa as soon as those conversations are finalized.